Never ending me? More like never replying to me.
That little... Okay, Red, I see how it is. You want to go into my video and steal a comment out of my audience? Fine. I'll show you how a real man makes a Moon Knight video. Whenever I heard that Moon Knight was getting his own Disney Plus TV show, I got really excited. And for the first few episodes, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. Starting off the show with Steven not knowing that he has DID was an immediately really good step. I've met people with DID, and it is not an easy thing to deal with. And whenever you don't know that you have DID, it can be really scary whenever you black out. Sometimes things will move, sometimes you're in the wrong clothes, and sometimes there's scratches and scars all over your body that you don't remember. So if the show leaned into that more, I think it would have worked a lot better. But there's also a really big secondary problem, which is the fact that this is not Moon Knight, this is Deadpool. They gave him a healing factor, they made him really silly, and they made him talk to himself. And don't get me wrong, he has his moments like that whenever it comes to the comics.
Where's my goddamn money?
But for the most part in the comics, Moon Knight is a scary motherfucker. You know how Batman constantly wears blacks, grays, and dark blues in order to hide in the shadows? And how Deadpool has admitted that he only wears red, that way bad guys don't see him bleed? Yeah, Moon Knight wears all white, that way you can absolutely see him and see that he's bleeding. Because he wants you to know that no matter what you do and what you throw at him, he is not gonna stop and he is going to get your ass. Personally, I don't like to call people with mental disorders crazy because that's really degrading and kind of offensive. But yeah, no, Moon Knight's actually crazy. It really doesn't matter who's in the driver's seat and which personality is in control of the body. If you're the one asshole who actually managed to piss off Moon Knight, you're getting your human rights violated. This guy is so goddamn insane that even fucking Taskmaster doesn't want to go after him. And if you want to know why that is, it includes Moon Knight flying a plane into a skyscraper. I genuinely hate what the MCU did to Moon Knight. I get what they were going for because they have general audiences to consider and they have to soften him to make that market, but in the efforts of trying to make a more interesting character, they ended up removing the teeth of their show. They had a really missed opportunity whenever it came to their plot because they could have had a story about a monster facing off against another monster, with a villain who genuinely believes that he's the hero and a hero who doesn't even care if he's the bad guy. Add on to that some cosmic horror elements whenever it comes to the gods getting involved, and now you have a perfect setup for a really cool show. But no, we just get another superhero origin story that just cannot stop reminding us, oh yeah, we're Marvel. I swear to God, I almost walked after this scene. And the horror elements don't have to be offensive whenever it comes to people with DID. In my opinion, you can start off the show with him being horrified about having DID, but over the course of the show, he slowly learns how to work with it while also trying to fight off his fear of it. And by the end of the show, he's slowly getting along with the other personalities and trying to learn more about them. Just like how actual real people learn to live with DID. But no, instead, all we get is another superhero show. And that's how you make a character analysis of Moon Knight. Take that, Red. I'd say I'd like to see you top me on this, but honestly, I don't feel like waiting another month. What's your upload schedule again? Okay, before I start, if I see one horny comment below this video, I'm gonna send you to the coffin. Whenever it comes to Mavis Dracula, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't really care for her in the first movie. No matter what personality traits you want to attribute to her, that doesn't really change her base personality from being a rebellious teen stereotype. Which is fine, that's what her character needed to be for the movie. And I appreciate the writing for not making her hate her dad. That was a trope that they could have easily fell into, but they didn't and actually made this relationship adorable. But while she does hold on to her own agency, that doesn't change her role from being basically the prize of the movie. Don't get me wrong, she is a fully developed character whenever it comes to this movie, but the film itself doesn't really allow a lot of room for growth. However, this changes drastically whenever it comes to the sequels. While I don't really like a majority of the writing whenever it comes to these sequels, I really love what they did with Mavis. Cause in the second movie, they actually make her a good mom. Her and Johnny are genuinely a good couple, and whenever it comes to her parenting, she's never negligent to the point where it becomes distracting, and whenever something does happen that crosses a line, she knows to put her foot down. This is Mavis grown up. They took a massive risk whenever it came to making her a mom, and in my opinion, they pulled it off spectacularly. While I was very indifferent about Mavis in the first movie, this movie made me love Mavis. And fortunately for me, this kind of writing attitude does follow into the rest of the movies, as they keep Mavis as a supporting role as she becomes more as an associate to her dad. While Mavis grew up relying on her dad, now Dracula is growing up to rely on Mavis, as she now fulfills the role of emotional and mental support for him. Despite what you think about these movies did one thing successful, and that was allowing Mavis to grow up, which is very noteworthy because they could have gone in a lot of bad directions by falling back on really bad tropes. The overprotective mother who hates her dad, the workaholic mom who hates her dad, the mom that's trying to relax who hates her dad. Fortunately, they didn't fall back on any of these tropes and allowed Mavis to become her own individual. Despite her remaining as the supporting role in the majority of these movies, she still allowed room to give off the impression that she has her own stuff going on. Like, she has her own life with Johnny and Dennis outside of her father. And for me personally, I would love to see a movie that is 100% dedicated to just her and her family life. Seriously, I think that she's fully developed enough as a character that I think it could work. I'm not kidding, Sony, get on that. Can't imagine it could be worse than this dumb shit. Oh my god, they really are just robot vampires. They act as infiltrators because they look like the common species and they spread the virus by infection. They transform and kind of have a bat motif going. They have sharp teeth and fangs and they steal other people's life force. And the entire plot of the show is set off by them trying to open a door. Holy shit, Murder Drones is just vampires but with robots. They even have the power to regenerate, and one of the characters' main powers is basically telekinesis. Like, holy fuck, how did I not put that together? And not only that, it gets even crazier. The way to kill them is basically by heat. The vampire drones that we meet act like upper-class aristocrats, with our main character acting like a modern-day middle-class commoner, with a twisted romance subplot that's ripped right out of a gothic horror novel, all with a post-apocalyptic classism theme, with the high upper-class 1% eating the common folk. Even the writing tropes still scream vampire story. We have a young girl bonding with a monster, the aforementioned twisted romance, the monster questioning his own identity, the girl turning into the same monster, and their entire relationship constantly being in question because their parents and their peers don't stop judging them, with that one girl becoming the strongest vampire out of them all because she's motivated by the power of love. Like, holy fuck, Murder Drones is just a vampire story, oh my god! Which I guess means I can finally put it on the list of other vampire romances that are better than Twilight. Who knows, maybe with this retext I can actually finally start liking this show. Okay, let's finally talk about Hulk. And before you start, Red, if you want a more detailed breakdown about who the Hulk is and where he came from, then go watch Red's video. But to summarize and keep it short, Hulk started out as a horror monster. Like, Stan Lee himself actively admitted that that's what he was going for. But over time, the idea of superheroes in comics started to grow, and Hulk slowly got caught in that drift. And on one hand, I'm kind of split on that. One of the main appeals about Hulk is the idea of somebody constantly trying to do good, but everybody keeps rejecting them. Hulk is the embodiment of isolation and loneliness caused by fear. And no matter how much he tries to help out and do good, that doesn't change people's automatic fear of him. A fear that people like General Ross use to manipulate the situation in order to justify his horrible ends. All of this culminates in just the idea of the Hulk just being this massive green monster that just wants to be left alone. And this whole setup has allowed a lot of really good comics that I personally enjoy, like World War Hulk. But with all of that said, there is this underlying missing element of horror aesthetic that Hulk has been missing for quite a while. And I think leaning into that kind of horror element would actually make the Hulk even more interesting with everything that I just said. Make and treat the Hulk like an actual monster. Don't make him this giant animalistic creature that has green skin and just smashes everything. Make me feel like the Hulk shouldn't exist. Make me feel like he is something that's wrong in the world, almost Lovecraftian. Don't change his design, just give me that kind of vibe. This is something I've been wanting to advocate for a very long time whenever it comes to the Hulk, which naturally gets people asking, what do I think about the 2018 comic run of the Immortal Hulk? I'm kinda split on it. I really like the ideas that the comic is trying to set forward, but the execution is not something I'm for. Like, I like the idea of actually exploring what the Hulk is, and the comic takes great strides in order to lean into that horror element I was just talking about. But at the same time, there's a reason why this comic is controversial. The storyboards and artwork constantly rely a lot on body horror, with a lot of fucked up imagery that's ripped right out of a slasher film. And the idea of tying Hulk to the powers of hell, Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. Not only does this have the problem of over-explaining the powers and magic, but it also has this prevailing problem that, okay, so the Hulk is just a demon now. Yeah, that kind of ruins the idea of the Hulk, because that just makes him way less unique. Look, whenever I said that I wanted the Hulk to lean into more Lovecraftian elements, I kind of meant the Lovecraftian elements of Jekyll and Hyde, you know, because he's literally a riff on Jekyll and Hyde. I don't know, I don't really like this comic mainly because his focus is way more on explaining the magic and the physical elements about the Hulk and what he is, rather than the psychological elements of what the Hulk means to Banner. And I think that negation of who Banner is in relation to the Hulk is what we've been missing the most. Like, Jekyll and Hyde only works whenever you focus on Jekyll and Hyde. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't really have a lot to say about Bruce, and I genuinely think that's a big problem. I'll admit, I am ashamed of myself that I forgot to put mummy movies on that list. But at the same time, as easy as it is to just go for the Brendan Fraser movie for the favorite pick, I'm instead going to use this as an opportunity to finally talk about the 1932 Boris Karloff version. Because again, as much as I love the 1999 version, this movie is a lot more sophisticated and I love it. Both movies basically follow the exact same plot, with Imhotep being resurrected and trying to resurrect his girlfriend with the main character's love interest. But while the Brendan Fraser movie spent its time with explosions, humor, and a lot of action sequences, the 1932 film spent a lot more time on story and building up atmosphere. Like, I want to say about half of this movie is spent on Imhotep just exploring himself as a character, which is important to note because Boris Karloff, the main actor, just got off of playing Frankenstein's monster, a shambling creature with basically no dialogue, so everybody at the time was expecting him to play a similar role whenever it came to playing the mummy. But instead, we got a character who has a lot of dialogue, and he carries himself with such authority that whenever he enters a room, you can feel his presence. Like, I'm not kidding, this guy has more aura than Dracula. Like, anybody who goes against this guy is either outclassed, outsmarted, or overpowered, and the only thing that can stop him is the Egyptian pantheon getting involved. Like, at least Dracula had Van Helsing to hold him off. In this movie, you got nothing. And the movie sells it really damn easily because the entire narrative is character-driven. While other early horror movies before this one focused more on spectacle, this was the first one that focused more on critical thinking driving the narrative, with the terror of Imhotep being less about his monster status as a creature and more about his manipulation. All he has to do is look at you and you fall under his control. And the loss of that control is less about the control of your body and more of the control of your identity. While later movies treat Evelyn being a reincarnation of Imhotep's girlfriend really nothing more than a plot device, in the original black and white version, Helen goes through an entire identity crisis over it. Because not only is she a reincarnation of Imhotep's girlfriend, but the spirit of her past life is actually stronger than her current one, which ends up going back into making Imhotep even more terrifying because all he has to do is wait. This guy set up a plan all the way back in ancient Egypt, died, and then waited over 1,000 years just for this one moment and let all the pieces fall into place. Bottom line, this guy's a basic bitch and this guy is actually terrifying. Oh, absolutely. I think that superheroes are a great medium for horror, but not in the way that you think. See, with modern day comics, we usually get horror in the style of something like Absolute Batman, which relies a lot on heavy imagery and fucked up storytelling. And you have comic books and shows like Invincible and The Boys, which try to show the dark side of being a superhero and having a world full of superpowers, where they take the line from Superman saying that he lives in a world of cardboard and try to make an entire series that shows what that world would look like. And of course, you have series, comics, and characters that are completely dedicated to actual horror aesthetics. Power corrupts, heroes turning into villains, demon aesthetics, darkness aesthetics, just full-on hell powers. Like, ask for a character who embodies the idea of fear and I can give you a list. Like, superheroes inherently are scary whenever you think about it. Like, you have a bunch of people with superpowers that give some of them the ability to level a city, let alone the universe, and they're just out there fucking around without any oversight. Like, I personally do not want to live in a world full of superheroes because it means if one of them just sneezes, I cease to exist. But now, with all of that said, I think that this is where we lost the plot whenever it comes to heroes being terrifying. Let's talk about Batman. I'm gonna make my stance clear. I hate the modern conception of Batman. Ever since The Killing Joke, modern audiences see Batman as this one guy who went through something terrible and is now fighting like hell every single day to keep back the crazy. Like, if you push him hard enough or give him one bad day, then he'll finally snap and be just as bad as the criminals that he fights. And I'm over here in the corner saying, No? Ever since that one backstory had been written, the main point of Batman has always been the idea of a guy who went through something terrible and now fights like hell to make sure that nobody goes through what he went through. And the main focus was not on what he fought, but why he fought. From mobsters to corrupt bureaucrats to the supervillains that he fights, with each threat representing a warped version of himself. From greed to fear to intellect to his own sense of justice. The term never-ending battle does not exist because it means that evil never stops. The battle is never ending because he won't give up. And the fear of him putting on the cowl is not because he's a crazy person constantly putting on a mask to try to fight off his insanity. It's because the villains of Gotham constantly use fear in order to intimidate the people of the city, and now he's using fear as a tool to terrify them and show them what it looks like. And Batman is not the only example, there's also Jean Grey. With every modern adaptation of Jean Grey, we just cannot separate her from the Phoenix. And this upsets me because every single time that we get a new version of the Phoenix, it shows that nobody got the point of it. Because modern adaptations only focus on what the Phoenix is capable of in terms of power, but not on the actual effects that it has on the human mind and what it did to Jean, and how it took this loving, caring, compassionate person like Jean Grey and turned her into a raging lunatic that murked a planet. This is the kind of horror that I think is missing in modern day superheroes. Not just the aesthetics and the cool powers that make them look really scary, but the actual integral ideas that make you understand their character. Because in a world full of crazies, anybody can wear a mask. And the horror of superheroes only exists whenever you take a motivation of somebody who has a reason to fight and then throw it back in their face. Because either the character can face that head on and say, I'm gonna fight anyway, or they can give up the fight and have a trip to Mars. Well, let's see. I've talked about Jacob Black and his abuse and Edward and his abuse, so how else can I talk about Twilight? No. No. I am not talking about her. I am not going to talk about Bella Swan. Absolutely not. Get her off my page right now! Well, it was worth a try. Bella Swan is easily one of the most hated characters in all of fiction, and I will never say that it's not deserving. Like, actually, what can I say about this woman that hasn't already been said by half the internet already? Well, since there are still people today that try to defend this dumb bitch, I guess I have plenty of room. It really does amaze me about how out of this massive cast of abusive assholes, this is somehow the worst character. Like, she goes from this annoying brat who just refuses to appreciate all the effort that her father goes into taking care of her, into this evil, narcissistic, crazy-ass bitch who will gladly emotionally manipulate and sacrifice you and your loved ones just so she can get back with her abusive ex. Like, no joke, Bella Swan is fucking psychotic. And the thing that makes me say that is the fact that she knows that she's being abused and manipulated. She is fully aware of what is happening and actively chooses not to care. Like, she fully knew that Jacob had feelings for her and actively chose to string him along, only to end up dumping him because she knew that Edward was right around the corner. Like, how many times did somebody in one of these movies just constantly tell her this is a bad idea and then she actively ignored them? Wars were caused by this woman. Actual wars were happening because of her. And what makes it even worse is the fact that she never gives a reason behind any of her decisions. This guy's a monster and has actually killed people? Fuck it, I'm gonna date that. That guy's a monster and is also physically abusive? Fuck it, I'm gonna date that. Oh, everybody's constantly telling me not to get physical on my honeymoon because it might end up killing me? Nah, I'm still gonna do it. Oh, actual wars have started because of my actions? Well, it's not really my business, so I'm gonna stay out of it. Bitch, you caused it! The only kind of justification that you can come up with that can explain this kind of characterization is that Bella Swan is the world's most obvious self-insert. She only has two character traits in these books, and that's that she's clumsy and she likes reading. And both of those traits are completely thrown out as this series goes on. And some of you probably think that I'm overreacting about this and saying that, oh, it's just a book series, get the fuck over it. To which I say it's not just a book series, it was the best-selling book series that had its own following for 10 years. People see this woman as a role model. She is a feminist icon to this day. To which I just gotta say, ladies, you can do better. There are so many awesome and interesting female leads out there that can absolutely be treated as a role model. They're actual people with personalities and character dynamics that don't stem from abuse. And they span over so many different genres, some of them not even action-oriented. But instead, you want this representing you? A bratty woman who is so addicted to toxic relationships that she still flirts with the other guy during her own wedding? Oh, yeah, she was even worse in the book. Seriously, Stephanie, we allowed you to get rich off of this shit? What the fuck is wrong with you?
These are the eyes of a psychopath.
Mascot horror, for the most part, is actually really fucking lazy. Do I think that it could be done right? To an extent, but not very well. But outside of those two examples, it's mostly just shit. Let's start off with the easy example, Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, I personally don't like Five Nights at Freddy's, and I made a previous video about that already. But even I'll admit in that video that yes, there are things that Five Nights at Freddy's did do as mascot horror that actually was done very well. Because the premise of the game was not just a bunch of mascots trying to kill you and be creepy, because the gameplay put the player in a situation that was 100% based on survivability. You were locked in a room and you couldn't fight back. That took the game beyond just the creepy mascots. The horror was tied to the setting. And a similar thing was also done with Bendy, because the mascot horror of Bendy was tied to a bunch of lore that was actually written into the story of the game, not as external media, that all served the purpose as a commentary on the cartoon making industry. While Bendy isn't as successful as Five Nights at Freddy's, the commentary was still enough to get people interested. And the horror of the game did not just rely on a creepy looking character. While I can openly and gladly admit that I am not a fan of either of these franchises, I can still respect the accomplishments of what they were able to do and how they were able to do it. But the same respect cannot be given to Poppy Playtime, Winnie the Pooh, Mickey Mouse, and Sonic EXE. The reason why is because none of these projects actually put effort into their horror beyond just a creepy looking image. And this also goes for all those dumb DeviantArt edits of a classic Disney character. Because this isn't horror, this is childish. Taking a pre-existing childhood character that's tied to nostalgia and making them look fucked up and creepy is not creative. This is literally the equivalent of your edgy OC that you made on Tumblr or 4chan whenever you were 14 years old. Only you were so lazy and uncreative that you couldn't even make up your own original character. And the fact that there are actual producers and directors that took characters like Winnie the Pooh and Mickey Mouse and made full-on movies out of this shit is just a massive showing of why horror is dying as a genre. And whenever it comes to Poppy Playtime, that's a whole other video. I guess what I'm getting at with this video is the fact that I don't think mascot horror is a good genre in the way that people do it. For me personally, the way that mascot horror works is that the mascot of mascot horror is the sprinkle on top of everything else. Like always, I will always preach that just because you have a scary image, that doesn't make you horror. You still have to write a story, characters, and a theme that the scary image is tied to and represents. But most of the people that I see do mascot horror just take a child-friendly image and make it fucked up. Oh, please, Tumblr, stop. I'm dying of creativity overload. Next, you're gonna tell me that Zack Snyder is making another action movie with shirtless men and a bunch of slow-mo. What?
Make sure when you're in the comic community that you're nice and caring to those around you who have different opinions than you. Because it's not nice to call people idiots for thinking one way that you don't, especially when theirs is just as justified as yours.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I didn't call anybody an idiot.
Yeah, you're right. You didn't. What did you actually say instead?
Instead of actually watching the trailer and, dissecting it so you can form your own opinion, a lot of you seem to have just watched what somebody else said and then you just automatically went with it. You didn't even attempt to dissect it for yourself and think, which is something that all people should be able to do.
Is that really the hill you want to die on, King? Semantics? Because sure, you're right, you didn't call anybody an idiot, technically. What you instead did was said that people aren't able to think critically, you called them childish, you called them sensitive, and then you blocked them because you're too much of a coward to face your own backlash. Whenever I saw Red actually call you out for your shitty behavior, I was proud of him because he deserves to say that. But instead of actually taking that criticism like a man, you belittled him, called him childish, said that he's not able to think for himself, and then blocked him like a coward. Which I guess shouldn't be too surprising since you did the exact same thing to me. Me and Red were very respectable whenever it came to us calling you out for your bad takes. Because at the time, even if we disagreed with you, we still held you in high regard. But instead of actually being the bigger man and taking the criticism at heart and just letting it fly off, you instead decided to content farm and make a big deal out of somebody calling you out for your shitty behavior. Get this through your thick skull, King. This is not how you gain respect out of your fan base. You can't go around calling everybody else a sensitive little baby whenever you're the one blocking everybody because they disagree with you.
At the end of the day, what I've noticed is that a lot of you guys, you're just sensitive. A lot of you guys don't know how to register other people's opinions that go against your own. I think the best thing that I'm going to do for you so that you don't have to deal with stuff like that is just to go ahead and block you. Because the fact that you tried to say I said something that I didn't say, I'm just not going to tolerate.
Look, do I think that Red's video was perfect? Absolutely not. There were several critiques that I could say about this video. Personally, I don't think he should have harped on the the suit so much. There are a lot of other problems with this trailer that are beyond just the color of that suit. Some he brings up, but he barely actually talks about. I also think that he should have used more examples than just you. I think that you are a good pull to actually use an example, but he should have used more in order to get his point across better. But ultimately, the biggest problem about Red's video is just tied to the fact that he's a newbie. He's new to this kind of content, so he's prone to make a lot of easy mistakes. So my criticism comes from a place of compassion because I want him to grow as a creator. But people like you see new creators in the content space as nothing more than an opportunity to dunk on somebody, which makes you a toxic fan and a representative that makes people scared of joining the fan base. And no matter what you have to say about this trailer, if you're trying to hold out hope because you want a good Green Lantern product, you cannot deny that this trailer was shit. Look, I want a good Green Lantern product just as much as you do, but even I have the guts to say that this trailer was trash. No matter if this was a movie or a TV show, there is still an expectation that the trailer has to meet. And whether or not you're holding out hope because you have faith in the project, that doesn't change the fact that this trailer was a bad step forward. If you disagree and you have a different take, that's completely fine. You have all the power to have that opinion, but that doesn't give you the right to start insulting and belittling people just because they disagree with you. Now, granted, with everything said, I technically have no stakes in this drama. I made a video disagreeing with you on Ironheart about a year ago, and you blocked me for it. But I just walked it off and went on with my day. I didn't think twice about it. I was just gonna let Red make his video, and I wasn't gonna touch this situation. But then you went after the kid, and that's my colleague. You can do and say whatever you want to me, and I won't care. But nobody goes after somebody I care about and walks. Now that I think about it, what exactly is the general opinion of analog horror?
I think you're confusing analog horror with found footage, which, yes, found footage is a type of analog horror, but analog horror can be more than just found footage.
Okay, before I start, please go watch the original video. I love fans disagreeing with me with a respectful manner, and I'm really glad that Joshua brought this up because this is something that I should address. So last month, I made a video talking about analog horror, and in that video, I conflated the term analog horror with found footage, to which I got multiple comments of people calling me out because technically those things aren't the same.
Like, it's just a horror presented to you through an analog medium. That's all it really is. And so that can be found footage or audio, but it could also be, you know, through an old school video game.
To which, yes, he's absolutely right. Analog horror is not just tied to found footage. It can be a movie, TV show, audio file, or a video game. However, my video didn't really talk about any of those other subjects, and I only focused on the found footage aspects. And the broader aspects about analog horror weren't really discussed in that video. However, that was kind of on purpose, because I'll admit, I kind of made that video without not really knowing that much on the subject. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't make that video without doing research. I did do research, but I didn't really experience analog horror in all of its different varieties. While I did try my best to expand my knowledge on the subject matter before making the video, that doesn't change the end result just being me dipping my toes in it and not getting the full experience. Which, yes, that is a problem I knew existed and I allowed to exist going into the video. So to make up for it, I focused the video more on the found footage aspects of the argument. This was an effort to pick up my own slack, knock out multiple topics at once, and make a proper response to the comment. And I also did this yesterday with my mascot horror video, where I started off the video talking about Five Nights at Freddy's and Bendy, and let the video bleed into topics like Sonic EXE, that way I can get that topic out of the way. Even though things like Sonic EXE only act as mascot horror by technicality and act more like a precursor to it, I still found a way to include it into my argument, that way people can stop asking me to talk about it. Seriously, people, stop asking me to make an entire video dedicated to this thing. It's not gonna happen. Now, with all of that said, I'm not gonna apologize for making these choices because I still think they served my purpose well. However, I will say my big mistake was that I never clarified that that's what I was trying to do, which is a real problem because that makes people think that I'm making a video talking about two different subject matters and saying that they're the exact same thing, which is a mistake. Sonic EXE is not mascot horror technically, it acts more like a precursor to it, and analog horror is not just about found footage. There's a lot more variety to it that I didn't mention. Those are mistakes that I allowed my audience to believe if they weren't knowledgeable on the subject, which ended up pissing off a lot of people in my comments who knew the difference between the two topics and were very mad that I was conflating the two on purpose. So yes, you absolutely have the right to call me out on that, and I do apologize. In the future, I'm gonna start making efforts to try to elaborate on my intentions with the video whenever I start doing shit like this, because seeing my own channel as a source of information for a bunch of people is a responsibility that I need to take seriously. So I apologize, and hopefully I'll start making better decisions in the future. Hey, I have a question about vampires that I really think is worth asking. How and why did vampires get associated with romance? Because actually think about it, before things like Buffy and Twilight, vampires were not seen as associated with romance. They were originally demonic corpses that represented things like disease, plague, and infection. They were vile, evil monsters that demonstrated the corruption of the human soul. Yeah, romance is not a word I would have associated with these things. Even classic literature like the Vampire, Carmilla, and Dracula didn't even lean into the romance angle. They all had a theme of seduction, but that seduction wasn't really in the terms of love. It wasn't really until modern media did we actually start writing in that romance angle. See, the original idea of vampires being seductive wasn't so you can pursue it. It was a moral corruption that made you lose control of your own self-preservation, when you feed into your own personal desires rather than listen to your better judgment. In Bram Stoker's book, the people who fall under the influence of Dracula are not actually in love with him. Their minds are being invaded both emotionally and physically, and the seduction plays out more like hypnosis or an infection rather than actual courtship, and they lose themselves to the will of a monster. But in modern media, we treat vampires less like monsters and more like just regular people with funny quirks, where the once predator becomes a partner and the seduction becomes something more sincere rather than a deception. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that this is a bad thing, unless you're Twilight, but I do think us steering so hard in this direction made us forget about something that's really important to consider with vampires. That being, if you're going to remove the allure of a vampire being dangerous, then what is the cost of being around them? However, I do think I have a solution to this. In old vampire folklore, there was a very specific weakness that said if you put a rose on top of a coffin that a vampire was sleeping in, they couldn't open it. Now, originally this was because a rose was a very delicate flower that was a symbol of purity, but if you take this weakness and put it in a modern context, it actually fits my thesis very well. Because in the modern day, the rose is seen as the ultimate symbol of romance. So using it against a monster that only sees those things as nothing more than a tool for manipulation can be seen as very nuanced and very poetic. And in this new context, a rose can represent love that accepts pain, that isn't naive, and doesn't surrender control. And a vampire can't seduce and manipulate somebody who already knows what love costs. So the person who uses the rose against the vampire ends up coming off as a hero who chooses not to lie to themselves. Somebody please write this book for me. I will hand over the copyright papers. Seriously, how hard was that? I just came up with a perfect premise for a gothic horror romance novel with a monster love interest. I was poetic and deep, and I came up with all of it in one afternoon. Seriously, how hard is that? You guys have entire novels to write stuff like this, and you waste all the pages. I hate romance books. How am I beating you at your own game? Hey, I just realized something about episode 8. Does anybody else notice that this is the first time that we've ever actually seen Cain with his feet on the ground? Since episode 1, every single time that we've seen Cain, he is always floating around in the sky. Yes, we have moments whenever he's sitting in a chair or on a couch, but his feet are still never touching the floor. And in this one moment, whenever he's finally trying to bring himself down from his own insanity, he finally allows himself to float down to the ground and walk amongst everybody else. Granted, yes, he does end the scene with going back up into the air, but that doesn't change the fact that this was the first moment whenever he actually looked at the rest of the cast at eye level. Throughout the entirety of this show, Cain has always been up in the air looking down on everybody else at a god's perspective. And the only times whenever he actually talked to somebody directly, he brought them up to the sky with him. So I find it so interesting character-wise that in a moment after he just declared himself God, he finally allowed himself to actually be on the ground with everybody else. In a moment whenever he really needed to talk to somebody about his own frustrations and confusions. Now, I don't have a theory tied to this or anything. This is just an observation on characterization and how good Glitch is. I just noticed this detail and then saw that nobody else was mentioning it. And I just thought it was a great example on how good the Amazing Digital Circus is whenever it comes to the details. So yeah, not really anything special whenever it comes to the grand plan and what the show's gonna do in episode 9. I just thought it was a really good detail that was worth mentioning. The original Book of Dracula is such a classic novel that it is a mistake that so many people haven't read it. Yes, I have repeatedly made the claim that the book hasn't really aged well whenever it comes to its language, but the story and characters are still interesting despite that issue. Like, I've already made a video talking about Van Helsing, and I can talk about my Queen Mina Harker all day. But now, for the sake of my argument, I'm going to bring up the character Quincy P. Morris, a character who I think is very underappreciated. With characters like Mina, Van Helsing, and Dr. Stewart constantly reanalyzing the situation and trying to figure out what's going on, you You just have Quincy in the corner with his shotgun waiting for somebody to tell him when to open fire. For those who haven't read the book and don't know who Quincy is, he is a Texan cowboy in Victorian London. And while it is absolutely hilarious to think about how the hell he got his double-barrel shotgun through customs in Victorian London, Quincy does serve a very good narrative purpose that is very essential for the story. That being the one guy in the entire cast that gets shit done. Whenever it comes to this book, the entire cast of characters are a bunch of British folk that do everything that they can to analyze a situation before taking action. They talk, they group up, they have meetings discussing the plot and trying to figure out Dracula's next move, with every single character trying to add in their own personal information and knowledge into the discussion. All except for Quincy. He's not a scientist and he's not an analyzer. In fact, he is the only character in this entire book that does not have a journal entry. And that's because you don't need that for him. He's not there for that. Quincy has only one motivation in his entire book, and that's to avenge Lucy and protect Mina. The only reason that he's in any of these meetings is just to find out what he's shooting at. In fact, my favorite moment of his is actually in one of those meeting scenes, where Van Helsing is doing this massive presentation trying to explain what a vampire is and describe what Dracula's goals are. Only for Quincy to look out the window, get up from his chair, grab his shotgun, and then just walk outside with not a word being spoken. Everybody in the room notices that he did that, but nobody questions it. All they do is just look confused as they keep going. Only for all of them to be jump scared out of their chairs to the sound of his 12 gauge being fired outside. Whenever he finally comes back in and they wonder what the hell was that about, dude, Quincy simply responds, "Oh yeah, I saw a bat in the window clearly spying on us, so I thought it was Dracula. Don't worry, I took care of it." And everybody in the room is just stuck staring at him like, what? Like, even Van Helsing is stunned, stupid, speechless, trying to figure out, oh my god, you just did that. Quincy P. Morris is only in this book for one purpose, and that is to find out what to shoot at and then shoot at it. He is the Chewbacca, he is the Thor and the Hulk, he is Toph Beifong. His entire narrative role is to find the problem and hit it with the solution as hard as he can. It just so happens that he finds every single problem at the end of the double barrel of his solution that is his 12 gauge. Like, this guy is literally Yellowstone 1923 as a character.
There's no dishonor in refusing to fight.
If he's doing this shit on day one, how do you think he's gonna be on day 15? Might as well get it over with.
Quincy P. Morris is one of my favorite characters in this novel, and that is because he is simple. But in that simplicity, he is the most effective character whenever it comes to actually handling the plot. And I think it's a great disservice to not utilize him more and make him an actual character. Like, so much action happens at the end of this book, and it's all thanks to him. Seriously, more people should know about Quincy P. Morris. Put some fucking respect on his name. Witches are fucking weird. For context, I just spent 3 months researching all of this bullshit to try to make sure that this video is structured properly. And my brain is so fried trying to understand all of this information that I might have to make an entire YouTube video dedicated to this. Because the amount of information that I have consumed to try to understand this topic properly is enough to fill a library. So let's start off with the history and then we'll work our way up. First off, witches did not originate with the Salem witch trials. Every now and then I come across a person who genuinely believes that the Salem witch trials is where we got the term witch, and that's not accurate because witches already existed in folklore long before those trials ever happened, with the two immediate examples being Baba Yaga and the witch from Hansel and Gretel. These two examples pretty much encapsulate the original idea of the folklore witch monster as an evil old crone who used dark magic and ate children. Now, this wasn't with every single witch in folklore, there were some exceptions, go see my Christmas videos talking about that, but in order to keep things simple, these two were the standard. So by the time the Salem witch trials finally showed up, the idea of a witch was already in everybody's head, being recognized on par with a vampire or a werewolf. But due to the actions of a really stupid priest, the hysteria about a witch started to suddenly spike. The hysteria went wild and everybody was constantly afraid that any woman that they came across who did something weird was a witch. But then that asked the question, what exactly counted as weird whenever it came to the 1700s? Well, for lack of a better term, hippie culture. Again, going back to my Christmas videos, whenever it came to old civilization, survivability and being part of society was seen as very important. So whenever you actively take steps to not be a part of that society or even antagonize it, you're seen as an enemy. Again, not going into the massive history because that belongs in an entire YouTube video, but the entire basis of the witch trials was because one single person defied a priest. So whenever it came to the local church running hysteria and making it go wild, the idea of the word witch became more and more of a blanket term. So it stopped being a term that just meant anybody who didn't follow the social norm and started meaning basically anything, like social outcasts, political targets, or anybody that you just didn't like. And even the folklore idea of a witch that they were basing this entire hunt on was starting to bleed into other monsters like werewolves werewolves and vampires. And that's because they were starting to not even use this on just women, they were using it on men too. So yeah, not a fun time for anybody decent. But then later in the 1800s, we suddenly got this rise of Wicca culture, a subculture of humanity that worships nature and believes in the occult. And currently, they are trying to fight off the original idea of their own culture being demonized by the witch trials. But there's a mistake that they're making whenever it comes to them using the term witch to describe themselves. Because currently they're treating it like they're trying to reclaim a word that used to be theirs and was given negative connotations by a crazy cult. But in reality, the word didn't belong to them in the first place, because Wicca culture did not exist until after the witch trials. It was a new subculture that was created after the witch trials in order to revive and reconstruct all the old pagan traditions that those trials destroyed. But modern Wicca tries to use the word witch as a spiritual term that means that we're taking back what was ours, whenever you never owned that word because you didn't exist back then. I guess what I'm getting at is that it's really funny that we constantly point at the Salem witch trials as a way to say that witches were seen as devilish because these trials took a folklore creature and changed their image, when in reality, no, the idea of a witch as a monster has stayed the exact same. All that happened was a cult of crazy Christians using that word as a blanket term in order to accuse a bunch of people and put them on trial. And all it really amounted to was a bunch of pagan traditions getting lost and demonized, and a bunch of innocent people being socially demonized and being burned at the stake for it. So yeah, I guess all of this just to say, this is still accurate. Wicca, get the fuck over it. Actually, that is a really good point worth noting. Why do we constantly portray Van Helsing as the lone badass vampire hunter, whenever in reality, that wasn't his role in the book, that was Quincy's? I've already made a video talking about Quincy and glazing his character, but whenever it comes to Van Helsing in the book, he's not really the lone badass vampire hunter that we constantly see in modern portrayals. In the book, Abraham Van Helsing is the mentor character that teaches everybody else what a vampire is and how to fight them off. The majority of Van Helsing's scenes in this book is him being a father to the cast and teaching them how to fight, while also explaining what Dracula is and what his plans are. Meanwhile, the majority of the action is dedicated to either Quincy firing his shotgun or Jonathan cutting a bitch. The most action that Van Helsing gets in the book is just him fighting off the three brides. Him and Dracula in the book have no rivalry, to the point where Van Helsing is not the guy who kills Dracula in this book, Quincy is. So why is it that Van Helsing is the character that gets the lone badass vampire hunter trope thrown on him, whenever Quincy is being ignored and forgotten? Well, two reasons. First being that Van Helsing was just a bigger name in the book and he had a bigger narrative role. He was knowledgeable, he was a doctor, he knew all about vampires, and he had a shit ton of information on Dracula. He was a kind mentor figure that was constantly caring for the cast and speaking to them whenever they're down on their luck. Van Helsing in this book, whenever he finally shows up, is basically leading the plot. So his name and character were easily remembered by audiences because he had a bigger role that just stole the spotlight. Which leads to the second reason, which is that Quincy was too simple to be remembered. Again, go watch my original video about Quincy P. Morris, but whenever it comes to his role in the book, he is just the gun. He's a cowboy in Victorian London who owns a shotgun and fires it whenever somebody tells him to. And while that does leave him as a really cool and memorable character that is very effective in the narrative, that doesn't really leave him a lot of room for narrative weight. Like, if you told a bunch of modern day fans of Dracula that there's a cowboy in the original book, nobody would believe you. There's also a negative side effect, which is Quincy's motivations, because everybody else has a way more complex motivation that is tied to the narrative except for Quincy. Jonathan Harker is basically the main character for the first third of the book, with his motivation being tied to the fact that he saw Dracula's castle, lived through the horrors of it, and decided that he can't let something like that live in a world where he cares about his wife. Dr. Seward is a doctor who takes care of Lucy and has a direct line to one of Dracula's slaves, Mr. Renfield. Arthur was just a normal guy who was ready to marry Lucy and then watched her turn into a vampire, causing him to be the one to kill her and dedicate the rest of his life to the mission of taking out Dracula as revenge. Even Mina eventually takes over the role of her husband as main character, to the point where the majority of this book is told in her perspective. Quincy is just a cowboy in London who also liked Lucy. That's pretty much where his motivation starts and ends. And a lot of modern adaptations see this as a reason to take Quincy and amalgamize him with another character instead of actually giving him a role. So now, as of 2026, there is only one modern modern adaptation of Dracula that actually has Quincy in it. And while actual fans of the book were excited to finally see Quincy P. Morris in a live-action adaptation of the book, most audiences were seeing him in the corner and asking to themselves, who the fuck is this guy? And yes, just like I said 2 videos ago, I think treating Quincy like this is a disservice. With a massive cast of characters that all have their own complex motivations and history within the book, having a simple cowboy just be there to shoot the gun is a very necessary role that you have to have. Quincy being such a simple character that's just there to fire the gun grounds the narrative to the audience to keep track of what's happening. Because while all the other characters are squabbling around trying to figure out what the next step should be, you can always trust the Texan in the corner to fire off a shot to get things back on track. Oh my god! That has 1 million views now. For context, that is my first video that actually has 1 million views on it. But here's the extra layer that makes it so special for me, is the fact that that's the video that became my channel. This video where I call out modern adaptations for getting Jekyll and Hyde wrong is the video that made me start the channel that I have today. It was the first time that I had over 100 comments, and a good chunk of those comments were asking me more questions, which made me go from posting a video like maybe once a month to making a video almost twice a day. To this day, I still have a stockpile of requests of people asking me more and more questions about different topics whenever it comes to horror and classic literature. And those requests I still have to this day. And it all started with this video. Like, it was the first time whenever I actually had people wanting me to keep talking. For the first time in my life, I actually had something to say and people wanted to hear it. Granted, yes, TikTok doesn't really like my content and therefore doesn't really promote it that much. I end up making videos about really heavy topics whenever it comes to horror, and I show a lot of imagery and talk about subject matters that are not kid-friendly, and because of that, my view count average is usually around like 1.5k, with only 5,000 followers to count, not even that. But the fact that there's a video on my channel where 1 million people decided, yes, this is worth watching, makes me want to keep going regardless. I even told myself that once I get 5,000 followers, I will start making actual YouTube videos, with the first one being a video essay talking about all the adaptations of Jekyll and Hyde as a tribute to this one. And I do plan to keep that promise to myself. So if you guys want to see that in the future and you want to see my channel keep growing, like, share, follow, and repost, I guess. I have a link tree in my bio that leads to my Cash App if you want to try to support me. Every dollar counts. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in future videos. God damn, 1 million.